So I just first want to say welcome to this time. My name is Kristen Kumpf, and I'm the Director of Migration, of Human Migration and Mobility here at the American Friends Service Committee. I'm actually based in Washington, D.C. And we're doing this call today because we have been on this journey, my fellow colleagues and I here at AFSC, along with our partners and many of you over the last several weeks, as we've been really in a time of discernment of looking at how are we standing together and building up our communities to take action as we look at what's been happening for our brothers and sisters who have been journeying as part of the different migrant caravans, who are in different ways migrating, and also for our brothers and sisters at the border who are seeing their communities continually militarized in this really awful time. And so as part of this journey, we've been coming together and have some really exciting proposals and some movement that is coming to take shape that we wanted to share with all of you. And because you all are friends and partners in this work and in the organizing that we are doing together, we wanted to make sure that this was both a time for us to share what's been happening on the ground, what's been happening through our discernment, and how we've come to this vision for action, but also make sure that we have space to really just to talk and to strategize and to work through some of this together. So with that, I'm actually going to turn over to my colleague, Lucy Duncan, who's going to ground us and center us as we begin this time together. Lucy?
Hi, welcome. So Quakers can be really quiet, and AFSC sometimes works sort of in the background supporting others. But I do want to sort of ground us in the sense that this action that we're helping to organize really rises from some core Quaker values that obviously you all share, and a real sense of the principles of the organization. So I'm going to just read a brief passage by Jim Corbett, who is one of the founders of the Sanctuary Movement, and then we'll have a little bit of I'll read a little bit more at the end of this time. But I think this is incredibly relevant to this time, and I've been so moved to see the way that people have gathered around this action and are willing to take some risk in order to counter what's happening at the border and the current narratives of such deep dehumanization, and I'm very moved by that. So this is by Jim Corbett. Underlying the complexities of Sanctuary's evolving role within civil society, the Sanctuary Covenant that gathers us into a people of peoples remains clear and present. Here in the borderlands, we join the generations that stand at Sinai. We hear ourselves called to become a people that hallows the earth, not by ritual or sacrifice, but by fulfilling our task as co-creators of humanity. At every turn, we see that humankind has not yet been fully formed into an image of the holy. Many among us are violated. And standing with the generations at Sinai, we also see that entering into full community with the violated is the way that heals humanity into one body. The communion that unites us is Sanctuary. So I'm really grateful, and I think that we are standing at a moment that is obviously really, really critical, and I'm so deeply moved that you are gathering to join us in this moment.
Thank you. Thanks so much for that, Lucy. So with that, we thought we'd start then today with hearing from our team down at the border. And so Pedro Rios, I know, is a name that is known to many of you and is a longtime AFSC colleague and is just going to share with us some of what's been happening down there that brings us to this moment of action. So Pedro, do you want to share with us?
Yes, hi, thank you, Kristen, and thank you everyone for joining this important call. And I think I have about 10 minutes or so for me to do a quick report back on some of the work that we've been doing, some of what we've been witnessing here along the border. And so I'd like to begin by painting a picture of what is taking place in Tijuana with the migrants who are currently there, as well as what does militarization look like on the San Diego side, connected with past Border Patrol behavior. So I'll begin. I do have to recognize that we do have a staff person in in Tijuana. Her name is Karen Romero, and she's been doing an excellent job of reporting back information to us about essentially the number of migrants that are in the area, in a specific sports arena that's much smaller than when you consider what a sports arena is, as well as some of the difficulties that migrants are experiencing. So I'll touch on that first. And I think the biggest factor right now is before any members of the caravan arrived or the Exodus arrived to Tijuana, there were approximately 2,800 migrants who were already in Tijuana waiting to be processed to some extent. And what that means is that if someone showed up today, that they would wait about 4 to 6 weeks before they would have an opportunity to present themselves at the San Isidro Port of Entry. And the Port of Entry is where it's a designated location where migrants will present themselves to essentially say that they want to petition for asylum. And so when we hear rhetoric about people doing it the right way or legally, most, if not all of these individuals are in this line, this line to present themselves at the Port of Entry. So 2,800 people essentially meant about 4 to 6 weeks worth of waiting. Right now, there are approximately 6,062 people that were not members of that first group of people. We can characterize them as being members of the Exodus, or that came during the time period of the Exodus. The breakdown specifically is around 3,800 men, a little over 1,100 women, and then minors, about 1,058 minors that are included within this large 6,000 block of people. All of these people are staying in a sports center. I mentioned sports arena earlier, but that gives the impression that it's a large area. It's a sports center. It's quite small. It's designated for only to hold just over 2,000 people. So we have about 3 times that amount of people that are staying in this sports center in extremely dilapidated, inhumane conditions. They are staying out in the open. We had some rain a few days ago. There are puddles everywhere. The bathrooms are in very poor condition. The porta potties aren't necessarily being cleaned. Some of them are overflowing. The showers are visible from the freeway and from the inside of the sports center. So many people are bathing with their clothes on, and then they have to find a way to dry themselves with their clothes on. So it's a very dangerous and sort of a degraded situation. We're expecting rain tonight, tomorrow, and Friday, which means that all of the belongings of these folks will probably get soaked. Many of them do have tents, but the tents are not necessarily waterproof. And there's been a lack of food as well. The Mexican Marines have been in charge of providing food and water. Sometimes they are only able to provide food or 2 meals per day. Migrants are complaining that they don't have enough water. And so the context around this is that the municipal government in Tijuana has been extremely anti-migrant. The mayor has espoused statements that in some ways mimic what Trump has been saying about painting migrants as criminals, insinuating that they are prone to criminality, insinuating that they don't compare to a prior large migration into Tijuana, which was by Haitian migrants, that the Haitians are willing and able to work while the Central Americans are not, and that they are leeches, that they shouldn't be in Tijuana, and so on and so forth. And so this has created and has emboldened a much wider anti-migrant sentiment, where a week ago, about 400 individuals rallied and marched to the sports center with the intention of going in and harming the migrants who were there. And so municipal and state police blocked this anti-migrant march from the incursion from going into the sports center, and it was an extremely tense situation. Together with this, the frustration that migrants have, many don't understand this concept of the wait time. Many are tired because of the long journey they have done, especially the children. The children that we are seeing that are being released in the U.S., so these are family units who are being released now, who were probably in Tijuana for about a month or more. Most of the children have upper respiratory illnesses, ear infections, lice. Right now, there's a small breakout of chickenpox at the sports center. About a month ago, we did see a child that was released in San Diego who was showing all the conditions that he had chickenpox. And so the situation, the health conditions are quite worrisome. Moving into the San Diego area, I'm sure most of you saw the images from this past Sunday and during the week. In less than a week, the San Diego Port of Entry, which is the San Isidro Port of Entry, has closed 4 times. This is a port of entry where approximately 130,000 people cross every single day. This means that any sort of closure has a direct and real economic impact to the border region. For the 5 hours that the port was closed on Sunday, San Isidro, which is depends, most of its economy is dependent on Mexican tourism, lost approximately $5.3 million. On the Tijuana side, it lost about $6.5 million from this sort of integrated economy that we share with Mexico, and threats of further closures has created a lot of tension, a lot of concern around border communities. We also witnessed the Border Patrol launching tear gas canisters at migrants, and so on the Tijuana side, that frustration led to a small group of migrants to march to the port of entry with the intention of wanting to present themselves or wanting to have a dialogue. They were confronted by federal Mexican police, which then caused the march to become chaotic, and many ran in different directions. The ones that in the direction where I was at on the U.S. side, I could see people who arrived. I could see them just beyond the border wall. And I also witnessed when Border Patrol shot these tear gas canisters. I also thought I saw a Border Patrol agent at least fire 3 rounds of rubber bullets. They have stated that rubber bullets were not used, but this is something that I did witness. I also saw when a helicopter flew down and used its rotors to push the plume of smoke into the canal where the majority of the migrants were, where there were children who were running and coughing and inhaling these toxic fumes. So it was quite a scene, very dramatic, very intentionally done, I believe, in terms of the overreaction to push a narrative that we've been critiquing. And the narrative is for the Trump administration to suggest that border communities are out of control, and therefore justifying a bigger budget for both the border wall as well as for increased enforcement along the border. The last piece I want to talk about is just briefly the militarization or increased militarization of our communities. And so we do know that there are an additional 300 military personnel that will be arriving to San Diego shortly in response to the situation that happened this past weekend. Consequently, there will be, I think, over 2,000 Army and Marine personnel in the region. That's in addition to the over 2,000 National Guard and about a 2,500 Border Patrol footprint that we have in the San Diego sector. There's been a lot of talk about military having the authority to use lethal force. And the concern that I have is that that's something that Border Patrol already enjoys, and they have enjoyed for a long time. So if Border Patrol provides direction to the military, and if they are an unaccountable paramilitary police force, then their direction to the military will be to use lethal force at their disposal, and that's extremely concerning for us. Lastly, I want to say that on a personal note, this is the first time that I have felt this level of tension personally, but also regionally. The level of tension that people have is extraordinary. I think where there are notices being sent out about to schools, about schools possibly shutting down because of personnel not being able to arrive to their employment, or the local university sending notices, making arrangements for students who live in Tijuana and who study in San Diego, it's quite concerning. So I'll stop there. I'm sure we'll have time for questions afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pedro, for sharing that context and your experiences on the ground, both personally and also what you've experienced in the larger political context. We wanted to layer this with Catherine Johnson, who I know many of you know, who works here out of our DC office as well. Was going to sort of expand out our understanding and context from her time working in the Central American region and some recent experiences down in Chiapas and Mexico City with our delegation of staff that went there. So Catherine's going to expand out that, and then after Catherine talks, and we'll have a chance for questions for Pedro and Catherine about the context before we move into action. Catherine?
Hi, everybody. For those that don't know me, my name is Catherine Johnson, and I'm the Policy Advocacy Coordinator here in Washington, D.C. I coordinate AFSC's policy advocacy on immigration, trade, and U.S. policy toward Latin America. So I wanted to give a little bit of context both about our work with the caravan and what we've seen it sort of as it's traveled through Central America, Mexico, and now up to the border, and then some of the other political context going on with the US government and why we see this as a really crucial time and why we've come up with the demands and for the political background that we have to these actions that we're calling for. So AFSC, we have programs in Central America that are focused on migration in Guatemala and El Salvador, and until recently in Honduras as well, and still have a lot of connections there. And then we now have a program in Chiapas that's fairly new, and we've had a program for a little while in Tijuana, both of those focused on human rights accompaniment and monitoring specifically. And so through these programs, we've actually been able to accompany folks in the caravan, in some cases from the very beginning. Like the group in El Salvador, our staff were there when they first came together in San Salvador, and were able to help send them off with some of the things that would, keep them a little healthier and safer. And so that's some of the support we provided in Central America. Our staff were also in some of the shelters there in Guatemala as people passed through. And then we participated in helping put together brigades of human rights monitors in Chiapas. And I actually had the opportunity to participate in one of those. And we'll come back to talk a little bit about that a little bit later. In addition, then 11 members of our staff traveled to Mexico City to speak with partners there on the ground who are providing support to the caravans, and then speak directly to migrants themselves. And so through all of this, we had a lot of opportunities to talk with folks that are making up these caravans about why they were traveling and what they hoped for the future. And what we heard from so many of them is that they're fleeing multiple types of violence. In a lot of cases, that's physical violence. I heard stories from several people of family members, of seeing family members killed in front of them, of not being able to live safely in their homes and having to flee because of that. But then there's also a piece of there's also economic violence that many people are fleeing as well. And people kept talking to you about not being able to provide for themselves and for their families, and living in poverty that's also imposed in so many ways by policies. And we know that in Central America, these types of violence are inextricably linked. They're linked to each other, but then also linked to governmental policies in Central America, Mexico, and the United States. So in Central America, we have criminal elements that have close ties to the governments that prey on people, a lot of times with complete impunity. So I think a really stark example right now of that is over the weekend, the brother of President Juan Orlando Hernandez of Honduras was arrested in Miami for drug trafficking. And the president himself was accused of diverting about $12 billion from agricultural projects into political campaigns. some of you actually on this call, I think were also with me in Honduras at the beginning of this year, where we talked to people who had been gunned down in the streets for protesting by the military police that was created by Juan Orlando Hernandez. Over 40 people were killed, over 1,000 people were held on military bases. And yet the United States, we arm, train, and in some cases even form these very security forces that are gunning people down. And no matter what abuses they commit, no matter what violence they're perpetuating, we continue to fund that. We've also obviously pushed our neoliberal economic policies in the region, starting with colonial policies, now with neocolonial policies that cause mass displacement of indigenous communities, of peasant communities, and suppress wages across the region. So basically what we're doing is we're perpetuating violence and poverty, and then as people flee that and they come to our border, we physically attack them. So this is part of the reason, this is a lot of our grounding for AFSC and why it's so important to us that we stand with these people as they come to our border seeking refuge. But in addition, so when I traveled with the Salvadoran caravan, as I watched people band together, especially on the third day I was with them, we started seeing immigration agents really violently picking off smaller groups of people as they traveled. And so in response, I watched about 300 of the sort of people at the very back of the caravan so we're traveling that day, come together, sling their arms around each other and march through an immigration checkpoint in which immigration agents had obviously amassed with several vans ready to pick people up. But as the migrants came together, their power in the numbers of people that they had meant that they could walk through that checkpoint and continue in their journey. And that's when I really realized what a powerful nonviolent movement this is for the very right to migrate, and started getting really excited about AFSC's ability to stand with them as they approach the border. When I asked people in Mexico City, in Chiapas, what they hoped when they arrived at the US border, several of them told me that they hoped to use the same power and numbers to negotiate with Trump. Or a lot of them told me they hoped to change Trump's heart, which I have to say both inspired me and absolutely broke my heart. I have no idea if it's possible to change his heart. I do know that we have a lot better chance of changing his policies if we stand with migrants there in Tijuana and at other points along the border. So again, that's why I'm so excited that we're pulling this together, and why I think it's so important for us to be standing with them. But there's another reason that this moment right now is a really crucial moment for this mobilization. So Congress is currently debating funding levels for both immigration and customs enforcement and customs and border protection, I mean, for all of DHS, but especially for those two agencies for next year. And President Trump has demanded $5 billion additional dollars for the border wall and other border militarization, and has threatened to shut down the government if he doesn't get it. ICE at the same time is detaining a record number of people across the country. They're detaining around 44,000 to 45,000 people every night in abusive and deadly facilities, including a record number of children and families. And they're demanding even more money to lock people up. So the deadline, they're supposed to come up with a bill on December 7th, but what we've heard is that they won't, that they're likely actually to have to push out the negotiation a further week. And so that week of the action on December 10th and the days afterward is actually going to be a crucial moment for us to be demanding that Congress defund ICE and CBP. And that's where those echo actions are going to be really important to really put pressure on members of Congress to defund those two agencies. So with that, I will pass it back to my colleagues.
Great, thank you, Catherine. So before we actually move into then this sort of the vision and proposal for action that we want to talk through with you all, I just want to pause for a second and see if you all have any questions for Catherine or for Pedro about all the things that they shared from some of the context that we've been living and experiencing and witnessing. Anybody want to ask? And you can use the chat box, or you can feel free just to unmute yourself and introduce yourself and ask a question. Any questions at this moment? Okay.
This is Sharon Stanley Ray from Disciples. I just wondered if, Pedro, whether you have your report that you gave in writing, your statistics and figures were really impactful, and I think we'd like to share your information, but want to make sure to share it most accurately.
I don't have the report in writing. However, those figures are fluctuating, especially with the arrival of more people. And so usually Karen Romero from our Latin American office in Tijuana provides a report on a weekly, or on a daily basis. And so that's usually helpful for us. It's usually in Spanish. I'm not sure how public her report is, but we can check in with her and see if that report could be shared. It is in Spanish, so it would need some translation.
Thanks, Sharon, for that question. Anybody else want to ask a question? Okay, great. Well, then I want to turn it back over to Pedro let's pick up then the ongoing conversation around sort of out of this context that Catherine and Pedro have shared, sort of how we came to where we're at with the proposal for this Day of Action in San Diego and this National Week of Action that we would love to invite all of you to join with us on both of those pieces. And so I think it's always so important just to be grounded first in the context of what's happening in the region and what's happening at the border, so that then what the call to action, I think, hopefully will resonate in a way that's will be different having heard that first. So Pedro, do you want to just start, and then the rest of us can fill in a little bit, and then we can have some conversation.
Yes, of course. And I guess I would start by saying that, our office, the U.S.-Mexico Border Program in San Diego, has been here for over 40 years. And during those 4 decades, we've been calling and trying to draw attention to how border communities have been militarized over the course of that time, to the extent where we do consider CBP and in particular Border Patrol to be a paramilitary force. We've had local law enforcement write editorials where they will say that they feel that Border Patrol is an occupying force in their community. They create a lot of tension and fear, and with checkpoints and roving patrols. And in light of that, we've done a lot of sort of advocacy at the federal level. We've written letters, petitions. We've been able to have some advances, getting, for instance, CBP to publish their use of force manual for the first time in 90 years. The very day that they published their use of force manual, they actually shot and killed a man in southern southern Arizona just about half hour after their manual was published. And so given the escalation of militarization, we feel that this was a moment to really lead with a prophetic voice, with be intentional about how we present our witness, that we be audacious about how we call to question the lack of moral compass that decisions are being made in our communities, in particular the impact that this has for people who are seeking refuge and sanctuary, but also to the border communities that are feeling the weight of the militaristic boot in our neighborhoods. And so, brainstorming with some of our colleagues, we thought that this would be a moment to bring that prophetic voice to San Diego, to lead with an action that would call to question the lack of that moral compass, but really be the witness that we need to provide a direction and hopefully change hearts and minds of policymakers, but also be the witness and the direction that we need to have. And I'm sure others can fill in terms of some of the grounding that we're thinking about.
Great, thanks, Pedro. Lucy, do you want to pick it up from there with some of the vision and sort of then what that means for us as an organization?
Sure. Yeah, and I will show you some of the tools that we have. Yeah, it's very clear that this is a moment, and part of a moment to oppose the hateful rhetoric and the actions that the administration is putting forward. And in conversations with all of you, it was very clear that the time to act is now, and that the window. One of the things that was a very powerful moment was that we were on a call talking about what we were going to do, how are we going to respond with AFSC staff inside AFSC after those that went on the delegation to visit with the migrant caravan came back, and Pedro got an email from Customs and Border Patrol saying that they were likely closing Friendship Park, and this was going to be the 25th anniversary of La Posadas Sin Fronteras, and that wasn't going to be able to be happening. And I think that was a sobering moment for all of us on the call, and real clarity that there was real clarity that we have to be able to stand up and say no to all that is happening right now. And so with some real sense of the energy building and the sense of the urgency of this time, and that we want to do something that isn't that where we're taking some risk to say no in a really powerful way, coming together as faith leaders, sharing our narrative of what migrant justice looks like and what policy should be, and especially at this time, as Catherine said, when Congress will have a new House and Congress is considering these proposals around funding. So it seems like a really important moment to really counter what's going on. So I'm going to show you some of the tools. So that said, I'm also going to move towards the practical aspects of what we're inviting you to do. Many of you have already heard this on calls, but we just launched. I'm going to actually pull up the live link, which I think I just got. Here it is. See if it'll load. This was going live as we are speaking. So I may not be able to show you the actual live link. It's going to be up. It's in the process of uploading. It's but the URL is migrantjustice.afsc.org. So the security is still processing, but I have the dummy website that we've been working on. So I want to show you what's here. So this is Love Knows No Borders. This was a vision that Jen Piper had for seeing sites that other people had organized to, so that we could, you're not unfamiliar with this, so that we could bring together all of the actions that people organized. There would be one site that people could go to find out what was happening in their community, and there would be information about the action on the border all in one place, and a toolkit for organizers. So there's a place if you want to attend an event, a place to find out about an event, and to search according to where you are. We don't have events necessarily loaded yet, and after this call, I hope that those of you who are organizing events or know people who are will send them out so people can put them here. So there's a place to look for events that are near you. There's a place to organize an event, and this is a form, and once you fill out this form, that event will end up on our map. There's the link to visit the border. So some of you have already received this form. So if you are sending faith leaders to the border itself, we really ask that you fill out this form so we know you're coming. And then we will be in contact with you with more details as we have them. And let's see, where did the thing go? Go back here. And then there's a place to donate to the action to support travel for faith leaders and lots of all the details that are going into all of this as well. And there also will be a link to the toolkit, which I'm going to show you. So this isn't. I don't think this is up quite. It's still in the process of being formatted, but this is a 10-page toolkit, and what we had intended to do is to create something that is really that works, that isn't just one kind of action, that that you, the people in communities, know their communities well and what their communities will respond to. And we wanted to provide options for people who had never organized an action to people who are really experienced organizers and could get people to do things that were a little riskier or more involved in terms of organizing. So there's 10 pages here of organizing tips and lots of resources. There's why now and points of unity, so real talking points, some suggestions on designing a powerful action and decisions that you need to make, some stuff about spreading the word on social media and other places, contacting the media. Lane is going to present on that a little bit. We've also we have a messaging guide around the talking points and the demands that we're making, and then a day of action checklist and roles. And there's a template. There's tips on how to handle different pieces. There's links for scriptural references and lots of resources. There's tips on how to plan a vigil, how to set up a series of fasting, how to do a Jericho walk. Many of you are experienced in organizing these kinds of things. There are demands. So I think it's pulled together from lots of things that we've done before and you likely have been done before, but I think it's, we're really proud of this, to be able to get this together in a week and invite people to participate in these different things, and to really take it. What we really want is for people to take this and run with it, and list their event on our action so people can find it. And we also will have a way for you, if you create a Facebook event, you can have us co-host it, and it can be on our Facebook page, appear on our Facebook page as well. But we're really excited about your willingness to do this, and hope you will send this out to congregations and really get people involved. And so each idea for different things has a little guide so that you can really follow it, and lots of tips. And Piper has agreed to be still be the point person on these ECHO actions as you need support. But we think that there's a lot here, and that you likely will be able to really use this toolkit and just go and run with it. So Lane, do you want to talk about the media part?
Sure. Thanks, Lucy. And hi, everyone. My name is Lane. I'm the Public Relations Associate here at AFSC, and I'll be the one on the ground in San Diego doing media support. And I just wanted to touch on a couple of things while we had you all on a call. For those of you who will be organizing solidarity actions in your communities, I wanted to make sure that you saw, as Lucy mentioned, the toolkit has some resources for that. We have a template media advisory that you can modify based on your actions, some tips on doing press outreach. And then we also have some messaging guidance to help us talk about these actions in a powerful and united way. And that messaging guidance also will be helpful for all of us who will be in San Diego to bear in mind and lift up our core demands, and to talk about why we're there. And we'll also be doing a big press push for the action at the border. We'll be sending out a press release probably on Monday to announce this mobilization. And if your organization or congregation is participating and wants to send out your own version of that press release, either just to send out the one we're sending out, or to modify that to lift up your own participation or unique angle, I'm happy to share that draft release with you so you can share it with your own press lists. And then finally, I'd love to connect with other people who are working on this action or solidarity actions who have comms staff who will be doing support for those actions, so we can share our press materials and help amplify each other's voices. So if you have comms folks working on this, you should put them in touch with me. I'll paste my email in the chat box now so folks can follow up. And of course, please also feel free to get in touch with me with any questions about media. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Lane and Lucy. So I want to loop back to then the other piece of this, as we started with this, is that this, in this sort of week of action, that this is, we're really anchoring this, and we sort of, I want to come back to this piece and then ask Pedro to share a little bit before then we return to talking about some of the nitty gritty and the ways that we might want to all work together to make this happen. But when we were thinking about sort of what does it mean in this moment, as Pedro and Catherine and others have said, to really take our moral courage and stand up in the face of this hate and some of the horrificness that's happening. We're looking at sort of what would it mean to anchor this in 2 days that are really important to a lot of our communities. And so one of those days being International Human Rights Day, which is December 10th, Monday, December 10th. And you know, it's a powerful day to sort of say, you know, that we share these common values around our human rights. And that for many of us who are people of faith, that how do we bring our faith and values to this moment to say, this is what human rights looks like and means for our communities. And then looking all the way up to then International Migrants Day, which is, you know, on December 18th. So it's a little longer than a week. We're stretching, we're gonna have a long week. And so sort of what does it mean to sort of anchor our actions in these days or around those days? I know that some people are planning actions right before or right after those days. And I just want to name, we sort of have 3 major calls to action, 3 major demands that we really are looking at. How do we make sure that we are anchored again in our values, but really making sure that the prophetic witness also results in concrete change, that is what it means in this moment to be organizing and to be directing our energy together in a way that ultimately results in the change that we're seeking. And so those 3, and this is all over the website and in our toolkit, but we can also put them in the chat box too. But the first being really, how are we calling on the government to respect the human right to migrate and seek asylum? And that in this moment, as people are fleeing violence from Central America and all over the world, they should be able to present themselves to immigration authorities, expressing their fears, and not illegally be turned away or criminalized for trying to enter between ports of entry to seek asylum. And so how are we protecting that right to migrate and seek asylum? Number 2 is, again, how do we stand with our border communities in this moment? How are we calling for an end to border militarization? That as we see this increase in militarization, additional law enforcement, additional military personnel, as Pedro laid out, as he was going through list after list of the different numbers of people who are at the border and the extraordinary authority that right now that agencies have to spend those resources that ultimately endangers the rights of migrants and residents of border communities, and is wasting all of our taxpayer dollars and does nothing to make us safer. So how are we making sure that we're listening to our border communities and revitalizing communities, not militarizing them in this moment? And the final one is calling for an end to detention and deportation of immigrants. And as a concrete step to that, how are we working towards defunding ICE and CBP, Customs and Border Patrol? And so I think, as Catherine named, that we actually have an extraordinary moment to put our collective moral energy together to really help make that a concrete ask in the midst of a week where those decisions around that funding is going to be made. And how do we make sure that our actions, again, are both, standing in solidarity, being prophetic, organizing our communities, joining together across our different organizations and groups and denominations in a way that we can together make sure that we're also really standing for these values in a way that makes concrete change in people's lives. So with that, I want to turn it back over to Pedro to just share a little bit more about what's going to happen in San Diego, because again, we're starting that week of action on Monday, December 10th, anchored in San Diego, and then looking at echo actions across the country that Lucy and Lane have talked about, of how to sort of what it will look like to have the resourcing to do that, how we want to then turn the conversation now into what does it mean for us to organize that together. And we'll sort of, after Pedro shares, I want to talk a little bit about sort of co-sponsorship and then have a space for conversation and dialogue. So Pedro, do you want to share a little bit of the vision and some of the ideas around what that weekend will look like of International Human Rights Day and the call to action in San Diego?
Yes, thanks, Kristen. And so keeping in mind that International Human Rights Day, December 10th, is on a Monday. So what we'd like to do is take advantage of the weekend, December 8th and December 9th, as considering them as days of getting to know each other, of planning and preparing for the December 10th action. So what we're working towards is on both Saturday and Sunday, December 8th and 9th, is to have a session, probably about 3 hours worth of training for people who are interested in taking a much more riskier participation in this action. And that'll involve obviously training, what the possible implications of detention or maybe arrest might mean, what the layout will look like on the ground, what sort of charges might be considered. And so those are very extremely important conversations that we want to have with people who are committed to taking a higher risk approach in this action. Obviously, all of our work, everything that we do, we're committed under the principles of nonviolence, and that guides how we move with this action as well. On Sunday evening, we're hoping to put together an interfaith service so that we ground ourselves with our spirituality, with our messaging, and this way we are fresh and ready for December 10th on Monday morning. The time slot that we're looking at is approximately from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. And so arriving at the staging area at 10 p.m., the location will be Borderfield State Park. This is the southwestmost area of the U.S.-Mexico border on the U.S. side. And it will involve a walk. It's approximately 1.5 miles where we will walk towards the ocean and make a left turn going towards the border wall. As we're approaching the border wall, this procession will be led by faith leaders, and faith leaders dressed in their religious attire will be leading the march. There's a point, maybe about 50 feet before reaching the wall, that is a no public access zone. Border Patrol calls it an enforcement zone. The intention here then is to cross into that no public access zone, and in order to participate in a ceremonial blessing of someone who will be on the Tijuana side. We will not be crossing into Tijuana. I just want to be clear about that. We won't be crossing into Mexico, but we will be walking into this non-public enforcement zone. And so that's where the potential for higher risk might happen. So anyone who will be participating in that part of the event will be asked to attend one of the 2 trainings that will be held on Saturday or Sunday, and that will be a mandatory training for anyone who is interested in that higher risk participation level. And that, in short, is the set of events that we're planning. We're hoping that this is the message. The message will be felt. If any of you have been to that part of the border, you know that it's an area where families are gather usually on the weekends. Unfortunately, Border Patrol has shut down the Friendship Park area. This will not happen at the Friendship Park area. It will be at the beach, just maybe about 100 or maybe about 300 feet west of the Friendship Park area.
Great, thank you, Pedro. And I want to open it up for questions and conversation about all these pieces. And just to be clear, that I think that the vision around this action, again, is a space to really, how do we stand together and have a moment where we are prophetic witness, and that there will be various levels of risk in that, right? And so I think someone just was asking, that there will be sort of, for those who do want to take that risk, and again, making that decision after some discernment, after a day of training, and really having the space to sort of come together and sort of assess that. And then for many people, for whom, being able to be present, participate fully in the rest of the action and the ceremonial pieces, and sort of be there as a supportive presence up until that moment when some people will take that higher risk. And so I think a part of this is just that, that journey together in San Diego, really looking to sort of, how do we have a faith body that is willing to come, is willing to learn. There will most likely be some workshops around sort of border context, again, some direct action training, and looking at how we're taking action together, anchoring ourselves in an interfaith prayer vigil, really being able to make sure that we're connecting of faith leaders across the country and the large faith presence that's going to be coming from San Diego and from California, and getting to know each other and having fellowship together, in addition to then taking that action from 10 to 2 on the 10th. So that's a little bit of the vision of the 10th. And again, as important are these echo actions and solidarity across the country, and really hoping that people will be inspired, and maybe for some people, you're sending a person or 2 down to San Diego, and you're also doing an action back in your own communities. And so I know many of you are on this call, work for organizations or denominations where you work with a lot of people in a lot of different places. And so I want to sort of just create a space now where people can kind of think that through. You know, what does it mean to, you know, be coming at this call thinking about how do we stand in solidarity together? And as a piece of that, we are definitely looking to not do this alone, to have co-sponsoring organizations to stand with us. And you know, that's a fairly simple process. You know, you just need to, you know, let us know that you want to co-sponsor. That co-sponsoring means, you know, sort of, again, agreeing to sort of the values base that we've discussed and sort of our grounding. And knowing that you're going to be then, you know, connecting with us and whether that's about sending people to San Diego or doing echo actions and just sort of promoting that through your networks. But we'd love for you to be present, you know, with us, you know, and then also have your, you know, name and logo on the website so that so people know that this is a diverse group of folks who are taking action in this moment. And so if you are interested in co-sponsorship, we absolutely would love to talk to you about that. So what thoughts and questions, conversation that you all want to have about sort of the vision for the Day of Action in San Diego, the vision for the national actions, the support around the website, the resources, the communications pieces. And we'd love to hear if you already have creative ideas for some actions you're planning in your own communities. So thoughts and questions that you all have.
Kristen, there's also some questions in the chat.
Let's take a look at that. Great. Oh, Eli's got a fantastic question. Eli, do you want to actually verbally talk about that? I think that's a great place for conversation.
Sure. Thanks, Kristen. Yeah, so, you know, we've got a pretty unjust regime and system that's enabling this. So what I'm trying to think about is how does this particular action really contribute to diminishing the sources of power that are upholding this injustice? I can sort of see the echo actions, right, as trying to get at congressional leaders and increasing participation of people around the country. So that's a couple of the sources of power. But I wonder if you could say more, or people have some thoughts on how this December 10th action in San Diego will help us to actually diminish those or other sources of power that are key. Does that make sense?
Yes, it's a tremendous question. Thank you for asking that. Yeah, I'd love to turn it over. I've got a few thoughts, but I'd love to turn it over to others on the AFSC team to talk about how you see this dismantling these powers of injustice and what ways this will make a dent in that system.
If you have thoughts, go ahead, and then we can add to you.
Sure. No, I'm not. I think you sort of. I think that the world is watching, right? Like I think that there is this, and I think in some ways for me, what is this feels like an extraordinary moment. And I say this as someone who's been organizing for a long time, 20 some years, right? And so I know many of us have been who are on this call and have sort of seen these waves of moments of opportunity and action. And I feel like, you know, it gets harder and harder to feel like, are we actually making a dent, right? Are we actually like getting any traction, and what does it mean to sort of, I think, combine that? And I think for many of us who are on this call as people who are grounded in faith and conscience and values, that like I think there is simultaneously this thing about we have to do something because it's the right thing to do, right? We have to take a moral stand, even if it's barely going to make a dent, but also as organizers and as people who believe in turning the tide of justice, that I think that is also what we're called to do, right? That we want to be strategic in what we are doing. And so I think from my perspective, I think the opportunity right now, and I think this is absolutely going to take all of us, right? And that's why I really wanted to put the call out to partners and to really think about how do we creatively link together in this moment and use this week of action at a time when there's going to be big decisions being made in Congress and that the world is watching what is happening at the border. And I think that's really important to know that I think this, you know, that's why I think I'm always so thrilled that we have a strong communications team here at AFSC. And again, you know, we want to resource the rest of you and connect with your other comms folks, because I think like, how are we telling this story? How do we make sure that, as you know, that I think there is this unique thing when people of faith and conscience come together to sort of stand up in the moments of chaos. You know, that's a different narrative. Like we have an opportunity to shift the narrative through training and through our, you know, our spokespeople training to really make sure that whatever we anchor on the 10th, and the bigger of it that is, the more that I think conversations I've had with many of you individually, is that the more that we can both get numbers, but also get sort of levels of leadership, right? Many of you have had great conversations with your leaders. And I think that's also very important. How do we sort of say that sort of this diversity of organizations, of denominations, and of leaders are standing together on the same platform, on the same set of values to say enough is enough, right? So I think that literally echoed with then actions around the country. And I think the more that people can creatively organize, which is why we wanted to create this toolkit out of the experience of a lot of our organizers on the ground who've seen real concrete change happen through creative action, is that when you have creative targeted action that actually is able to, again, sort of bring people in, organize the people in your community, capture the imagination and the narrative of people and the media, and then ultimately, strategically target that towards some concrete demands, with our members of Congress in particular at this moment who need to step up, right? And I think also there's other local and state battles to be fought, right? And so I think it's that some of this, I think there will be a variety of sort of tactics and demands in this moment. But I do think that there is an opportunity to sort of, if we pair that together, a very loud prophetic action at the border that we think will get a lot of attention, simultaneous with other actions around the country, and that there are many, many organizations doing it together in this, in the span of a week. I think the hope is that we can carve away, and at a minimum, for example, stop ICE and CBP from getting funded in the way that they, might hope it will. And who knows, protect asylum a little bit more. Like there may be some other ways that we can get Congress to step up, and also I think see impact, on local and state fights, in addition to the narrative shift, I think that will ultimately happen. So that's my humble opinion. There are others on the team or others amongst you that have ideas about this. I'd love to hear. Catherine, do you want to add?
I do. So as we've watched the caravan travel across the region, we've actually seen them build power and then be able to use that power in really effective ways. Like we saw them able to push through, a lot of times through their courage and their willingness to put their bodies on the line, but then also their willingness to come together and kind of protect the most vulnerable amongst them. But we watched them negotiate with a federal government in Mexico that's been really, really anti-immigrant, largely due to U.S. pressure, but for other reasons as well, and really xenophobic. We watched them actually able to negotiate to a point where they were offered legal permanent status in Mexico. It wasn't a good enough deal. It's not actually what they wanted. It meant they'd had to stay in Chiapas and Oaxaca, but it was still a pretty amazing show of force. And that's what I was trying to say, that I physically watched them do this as they marched through this immigration checkpoint when immigration was ready and there to pick them up. But we've also seen them across Mexico inspire a lot of generosity and be able to inspire the generosity that was necessary for their physical support and well-being to help them have this then political power in Mexico. Obviously, it's a really different context here in the United States, but I do still think there's power in those numbers. And I think there'll be, 10,000 people at the border in Tijuana is not enough to build that power and actually force some sort of a negotiation. But I think that as we have a new administration starting in Mexico just next week, that certainly rhetorically is much more friendly to immigration and much less friendly toward doing a lot of the U.S.'s dirty work. It's all kind of to be seen how that plays out. But then that, in addition to, the change in Congress here in the United States, I do think it's a moment that, that as Kristen said, standing with migrants can actually force some real negotiation, especially, I think, possibly not, them able to sort of enter en masse like they were able to in Mexico, but to changes in asylum policy, to opening up the processing of asylum applications again in a lot of these border crossings where it's basically been shut down, or rolling back some of these policies that are blatantly unconstitutional anyway. So I think there's negotiating room, and I think that that lending our moral authority, being willing to put our bodies on the lines, and especially this crucial moment in the negotiations on the budget, it's actually a pretty powerful moment.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine, for adding that. So looks like there's a series of questions about the action at the border that maybe we can just kind of tackle together. And again, if people want to jump in addition to what you've written in the chat, but just to highlight for Pedro and Matt and some of the other folks on the call who are organizing that. Looks like there's questions around sort of the level of leadership that we're looking for to participate in the actions, in addition to whether there may be any congressional members or other political folks participating. And then just a question about sort of, what does it look like if folks want to participate in the December 10th action and the walk, but not the civil disobedience, do they need to participate in December 9th training? And what would they benefit if they do participate in that training? So sort of level of leadership, who might be participating, and what the training will sort of provide for people considering when to come down. Pedro and Matt, you want to talk about that?
Sure. In terms of the training itself, so regarding the training itself, I think it lends itself to building community. It's not only about taking in the information and learning about what to expect with different possible scenarios, but it's also being together with all the other folks that are committed to take this next step. And so I think that sort of training is always useful for that purpose. It's obviously extremely useful, and as we're saying, mandatory for people that are willing to take that risk. But for others who are not, I think it provides them a much more security context and consciousness for when they're participating in the activity on Monday. So that's going to be really useful in terms of what the content of the training itself that is being developed. Discussions will include posing different scenarios, different possibilities of what might occur. Certainly, I think we're going to incorporate what that specific area has meant to the region, not only Friendship Park, but the beach area as well. A little bit of context in terms of the border fence, what the terrain looks like, and then what to expect as we're making that walk to the beach and then towards the border fence. So certainly, if people don't want to participate in the elevated risk action, they're more than welcome to accompany the group that is. And so the march or the procession will be led by faith leaders, and then obviously that's what we want. The imagery that we want to capture is exactly that the faith leaders are confronting with their moral authority the lack of moral compass that the policies and the state is implementing with their policies. In terms of level of, I think I heard to what level we would want to see participation from different faith communities. I mean, I think it's always helpful to have the highest level is always best, I think, and for name recognition, for messaging and power, and who carries that authority within that particular faith tradition and is speaking on behalf of their constituents. And so I think that the highest level is always important, but certainly other folks are more than encouraged to participate. And I might have missed a few questions in between.
That was great, Pedro. And I think there was just another question that Lucy was responding to in the chat about, do we know the level of consequence yet around civil disobedience? And so Lucy was just starting to handle that. Do you want to, Lucy or Matt or Pedro, do you want to say any more about that?
So there's several different scenarios. The most likely is a misdemeanor trespassing charge, and there's different scenarios for what that would mean. The worst case scenario are felony assaulting an officer charge, and the reason that the lawyers that we talked to had heard of cases where people brushed an officer or did something like not that others might not look and see that it is assault, and were prosecuted for felony. So I think that one of the pieces of this, and so we're looking at the possible scenarios, but we're also constructing very, very clear ways to address those possibilities in terms of how we design the action and the a depth of commitment to nonviolence and in our civil disobedience. And that will all be presented in the training that we do. I see Matt's there, so if you want to add anything, that would be great.
Nothing to add. You spoke about it perfectly. We're going to do lots of prep and training and bring in the spirit of nonviolent direct action.
And I want to say that we will do our due diligence in terms of, you know, legal support, legal observers, medics, obviously. We will do our due diligence, but you all can see the context we're in. And so it's not, part of what makes this powerful is that there is some risk. So we're not going to, you know, I think it's really important to say that we will be as diligent in our preparation so that we mitigate the likely legal impacts to those that are participating, and it is the context that it is.
Yeah, and we will be getting as much information as we can and getting that to you as we understand it.
Great, thank you, Matt and Lucy. So I want to just see if I know a couple of you. So Kelsey put in the chat box about if anybody wants to organize actions or thinking about organizing actions in Florida, North Carolina, or Georgia, which is great. So I just wanted to see if people wanted to talk about what they're thinking about at this point, because I've had conversations with many of you, and I think it's often helpful for those of you who are still trying to think about how you might participate, what that could look like. It's good. I think it's always good to hear from each other. So I'd love if folks could just jump in if you are starting to organize, if you are already hearing interest from people to either go to San Diego or to do echo actions, some of the creativity that you're thinking about in order to do those actions. Like what are folks starting to think about or plan? Go ahead, Sharon. We see you.
Yeah, a few things. One is to lay out a hope that I'm aware that the Immigrant Integration National Conference is going to be happening in Arlington, including on the day of the 10th. So there already is an action at the White House that I understand is being planned for 5 o'clock on that day. I have reached out through email, haven't heard responses back yet, but my prayer is that that also can have, at least for part of the action, have a real flavor of an echo action in relationship to what will be happening in San Diego on that day. So I hope that works out. I'm interested in an event at the other side of the week as well, on the 17th or probably definitely on the 18th, especially in correspondence with the International Migrant Day. I would hope that we could have a very strong event collectively in DC together on that day, and that maybe that's possibly an important companion day for an element of civil disobedience, as well as push on the Hill for the asks that were raised up. And I'm wondering if others are thinking the same, and if we can continue to move forward towards that together. The other kind of idea I had was whether we would be well served to try to get our executive directors or CEOs or heads of communion, depending on what types of faith or human rights organizations we're in, to kind of have a CEO or a heads of offices day where in their various locations, we ask them specifically to try to get press coverage so that we have those, as was talked about earlier, so that we have those voices of the key leaders really speaking out, and if possible in a common time.
That's all excellent, Sharon. Thank you for laying that out. And I love the idea that I think there could be an opportunity, hopefully, to partner, together with all of us in the Interfaith Immigration Coalition, and maybe even with the immigrant integration folks for the 10th. But I love the idea of how do we close the week in a strong push here in DC to bring that home. And I see Anne popping in the screen. Anne, did you want to say something? Hey, Anne.
Well, I'm just aware of the December 17th La Posada, which is planned for DC.
Right.
We may be able to do that a little more overtly in
Mhm.
connection with. It's not our event, but Clinic, I think, would be amenable to that. IIC, JFI are all involved in that.
Right.
So that's another
And
opportunity.
And
Yeah,
I would chime in also on that, Anne, and say I'd be excited if that becomes a time when we could have an action perhaps that is more bold, that gets us inside the House and Senate office buildings for some action. And I understand that Clinic can't do that, but that they probably would be appreciative if it happens.
Let's
or
talk about
that
it.
it happens the next day. Yeah.
Yeah,
right.
the 18th might even be better and lead up to that. So yeah, something for sure.
Right.
Thanks.
That's great. And also just to, so Sandy from Sojourners and I had this very similar conversation, and I think she was also going to talk with the folks at Clinic. So I think that would be a great conversation for all of us to come together around to see whether it makes more sense to do it in combined on the 17th or a different action solely focused on this on the 18th. But I love that there's a DC piece that we can sort of close out the week with that. Thank you. That's great. If anybody else wants to jump in with thoughts, creative actions, what you're planning.
Hey, yeah, this
Hey,
is
Noel.
Noel Anderson with Church World Service. Yeah, I was just wondering if you could expand a little bit more on two things. One, the echo actions. I've heard from some of the border communities like SPCC that they really feel that this will be really important, to really be targeting our MOCs. And are you calling that for people to do that at ICE offices, or I don't know, maybe I missed that part, but just more, and I guess the toolkit, maybe we'll have more info on that. And then also the co-sponsoring thing. I do think it'd be really helpful to have a little more clarity about, what that entails. I know from my own experience of doing these things that people simply won't sort of sign up if you don't have sort of, here's what this means, 1, 2, 3 that we're asking you to do. So I don't know if you want to do another sign up sheet for that or not. I guess I have one more question, which is on the back end, if people do co-sponsor and are helping mobilize these events, how are we sharing that? Is there going to be a map of actions? So yeah, sorry, that's a lot of questions.
No, those are all great questions. So let's take the last two and then let's come back to the other piece. And I'd love to hear if Catherine or Lucy or others have thoughts about that, about sort of the power of the echo actions and sort of how to really make sure that they're targeting and creating the impact we want to make. I think the part that I don't know if you saw you were on for this part, Noel, but on the website there actually is a map that's going to be mapping where the actions are that we need, but what we really need is people to sign up on the website. So I think part of this that we would love to ask all of you is as we go from this call, we'll be sending out, a link to the website. And also, again, I think Lucy put it in the chat. It's really simple. I think it's migrantjustice.afsc.org. Is that right? Did I get it right? I did.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Simple. migrantjustice.afsc.org. So you can go there. It's now live. And there is a map, and you can start to put in your if you have an echo action plan for that. And also it has the links if people want to sign up either to come to the border or to attend or organize an echo action. So all that is there. Yes, we've been debating having a space on there and a forum for co-sponsorship. We're still yes, debating that. But I appreciate your thoughts and wisdom on that, Noel. And so we'll absolutely be looping back around with folks on that so that is a little bit clearer. And I'm grateful that many of you have already reached out and said that you've already had those conversations and are on board to co-sponsor. And so we're grateful for that. I will say what we'd love as part of that is then for you to send us your logo so that we can get you up on the website so that we can have the diversity and the view of who all is co-sponsoring this visible for people who are going there. And so then, yeah, Catherine and Lucy, do you all want to talk about the power of the echo actions and making them strategic in a way that the folks at the border are hoping for?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what I would say about it is that there are many choices, and you need to choose one. I think the echo actions are really critical, and I think that there's this kind of way in which the way that there's this massive call at the same time with the same demands on the same day or in the same week at least, is going to make an impression. And then obviously there's a lot of media that can arise from that, that can happen. I also think that the way in which we've designed it so that you can do an action that is a deeper action than, vigils are wonderful, but that may be deeper than a vigil, that is closer to a direct action, that way of really expanding the opportunity to do something that gets more attention, that is more prophetic in your communities, I think is a really, really important thing. And I agree with Noel, it's a critical part of this design, and it's a critical part of this moment and this week being successful, is people, like, there being such powerful voices, and so many of us, and acting in really creative ways. It doesn't have to be, huge numbers, but a creative action can really get people's attention, is gonna really distinguish this, I think, from other things that we might do. So I think it's really important, and I agree with Piper said. Piper is a very seasoned organizer, and she said, "I'm really proud of this toolkit," and I think it's a really really useful organizing tool, and I think that you all will find it to be incredibly helpful.
I think with that, because there's multiple goals to these echo actions, I think there's multiple possibilities for targets as well. I think members of Congress offices are great. If you do have a local ICE office, especially one that's in a fairly public place with a lot of sort of foot traffic, that's great. Similarly, if you have, if there's detention centers that are convenient for people that media will actually come out to, then that's certainly an option. But a lot of our goals with this are media and public awareness. So keeping that in mind at the, while you're choosing which of these targets is probably best for your local area.
Great, thank you, Catherine and Lucy, for that. And just a flag, as I know we're starting to wrap, and we'll be signing off here in a few minutes. And I think that one of the pieces of this is part of the how do we continue the conversation with our communities, right? So our hope is that now that we have the website up and live, now that we'll have a toolkit, people can go there to the website, sign up, and get the toolkit, and then feel free to use that and circulate that. Is my hope is, and in a minute we're going to sort of just like close out by asking folks to sort of think about just letting us know how we can follow up with you and a way we can support you as you're thinking about how to work with and follow up with the folks in your communities. And so I think as part of that is we're going to be doing a Facebook Live on Monday. Wanted to see if one of my colleagues wants to talk about the Facebook Live and how that could be a good opportunity for people who might be considering doing echo actions to get on board. Anybody want to talk about the Facebook Live, Lucy?
Yeah, I can talk about it. It's going to be some of the same content that you've heard, although for a much broader audience. So it'll be focused on a briefing about what the context at the border. Both Catherine and Pedro will be presenting, and we're hopeful that some of our staff in Tijuana can also, and Mexico can also present. So really give a real vivid and live perspective from both sides of the border, because we work on both sides of the border. And then we will be focusing on really on the website and how people can support what we're doing and participate in it, and how to and going over how to organize actions in particular. So we're going to be sending an email out tonight to 106,000 people to participate in that, and hope you all will share it widely. We did put the link in the chat twice for the Facebook invite for that. Sorry about my dinging computer.
Great, thank you, Lucy. So just two final things, and then let's go ahead and wrap. And I just noticed from the chat, Eli put a really powerful question, sort of layers of questions. And I just want to name, I think maybe Eli, we can connect after this. And I think there's actually several things in here for different people within our team to think about in terms of the framing for the actions and what that means. And I think I just want to particularly highlight this question around, could one of the targets be sort of around this question of corporate accountability? And I think that is an ongoing conversation for us here too at AFSC, and we have a lot of of different pieces around that corporate accountability campaigns. And so I think that's a really interesting question for, could that be an additional piece? And I think there is like room for creativity and opportunity for different folks on the ground who is, I think, as long as it's sort of framed and the values and the demands and the sort of the general call to action that we're putting out, I think that there, if whatever resonates with where people are at locally and how they can, in that solidarity, also then move forward their own work and their own goals, I think that's really, that could be great, really important. And finally, Rebecca's asking about sort of times and location for the trainings on Saturday and Sunday. Pedro, did you want to, or Matt, do you want to say more about that?
Yeah, so the location has been defined. It'll be a church in the Hillcrest area of San Diego, and you know, if you are planning on attending, we certainly will have more of an updated information shortly. But do know that we are working on that, and we'll have that information available soon.
And the times are, I think, what, 1:30 to 5 both days? Is that right, Pedro?
That's correct. And so 1:30 to 5 for the training, and then the interfaith session will be, I believe, at 6:30 in the evening on Sunday.
Got it. Great.
And we hope to live stream that as well, so people can participate from afar.
Great. So I think with that, as we close, I think Diana and Lucy, I'm going to turn it over to you. I think that you all have like the poll and some closing words. And I just want to say thank you. I'm really grateful that you all took the time today at the end of the day to get on and to be part of this conversation and to dream how we can do this together to really make an impact in the lives of so many people who are migrating at the border in our own communities. So Lucy and Diana? You're on mute, Lucy.
Diana, why don't you go ahead and put the poll up? What we want is just to do a little bit of gathering information about what you all intend to do in terms of the follow-up, in terms of what we're asking. And and I did want to say to Noel's question, we actually do have a very clear list of what we're asking partners to do. If you need that, we can definitely send that. That's been developed. But go ahead and fill out the poll. And then I want to just read something from a piece that I wrote. I was visiting San Diego in October. And went to Tijuana with Pedro and Adriana, and then wrote about it. And this is this is something that I wrote. It's called "The Freedom to Seek Sanctuary: A Quaker Perspective on the Migrant Caravan." So this is kind of the vision for what we're doing. What kind of gathering might we have at the border if we understand that now we have a moment in which to enact a vision of society beyond walls and borders, beyond white supremacy and hate? Like migrants taking one another's hands through the border fence, let us hold each other and stand for such a vision. Let us open our hearts and break huge doors in these walls. Let us pray with our lives to make it so. And do you want to show the poll? Great, wonderful. Thank you so much for standing with us at this time and for being willing to take risks and to, we think there's something way beyond, there's something really moving, and we're glad that you're willing to stand up at this time with us and are deeply appreciative. And I really want to thank all my co-presenters and all of you for being here. Thank you so much. And Kristen, do you want to say a final thought?
Again, I'll just say thanks so much, everybody. It's awesome to be organizing with you. And yeah, please, again, feel free to reach out to me or anyone on the team if you have any questions or want to have some follow-up conversations, and we'll be reaching out as well. So thanks, everybody. You all are great. We'll hope to see you soon in San Diego or the DC action. One of the two. We'll see you. Take
Bye,
care,
thank you. Bye.
Thanks.